$2,000 a month, in a city where a one-bedroom apartment costs $1,700. That's what I was working with. Not by choice, initially, by circumstance. A job transition that reduced my income dramatically. A city I couldn't leave because of family obligations. A financial situation that looked, on paper, completely impossible. $2,000 a month in a high-cost city is not supposed to work. Every personal finance calculator tells you it doesn't work. Every conventional wisdom conversation tells you to move somewhere cheaper. But I couldn't move, and I had to figure it out. What I learned over the following 14 months changed how I think about money more fundamentally than anything I've read in any personal finance book. Not because I discovered some secret hack, but because when you're forced to make $2,000 work in a city that costs twice that, you discover exactly which expenses are actually necessary and which ones you were paying for without realizing it. Today, I'm walking through what I did, what worked, what failed, and what I learned that applies to anyone trying to build financial stability, regardless of their income or their city. The math that looked impossible. Let me show you exactly what I was dealing with. $2,000 monthly take-home income. The standard expenses in my city, average one-bedroom rent, $1,700. That left $300 for food, transportation, utilities, phone, healthcare, everything else. $300 for everything. That math doesn't work. You can't eat on $300 a month in a high-cost city, let alone pay utilities and transportation. So I had to make different decisions than the standard ones. Decisions that felt uncomfortable at first, but turned out to be the most financially intelligent things I've ever done. Decision 1. Housing is everything. The first decision was the most important one. In personal finance, housing is the variable that determines everything else. If you get housing wrong, you can't fix it with lattes or subscriptions. The math just doesn't work. I couldn't afford a one-bedroom apartment. Not even close. So I made a decision that a lot of people resist for pride reasons. I got a roommate. Not a friend. A stranger from an apartment listing website. Someone I'd never met who needed to split a two-bedroom. The two-bedroom cost $2,200 monthly. Split two ways, $1,100 each. Instead of $1,700 for a one-bedroom, I was paying $1,100 for a room in a two-bedroom. $600 freed up per month. That $600 is the number that made everything else possible.
I know roommates sound like something you do in college and then graduate from. I had that mindset too, but here's the reality. Paying $600 extra monthly to have your own space is $600, not building your financial life. Over 12 months. That's $7,200.
Over 5 years, invested at 7% return. That's $50,000. $50,000 for a private one-bedroom apartment versus a shared two-bedroom. That's the real cost of the pride of living alone when you can't afford it. Decision 2. Food is where most people fail. Food was my second battleground. In a high-cost city, food gets expensive fast. Restaurants are expensive. Grocery stores are more expensive than suburban equivalents. Delivery adds fees and tips. I had roughly $400 monthly for food after housing and utilities. That's approximately $13 per day. In a high-cost city, $13 per day sounds impossible. A lunch out costs $15 minimum. Dinner out costs $30 to $50. Here's what I did. I stopped eating out almost entirely. Not cutting back. Stopping. For 14 months, I ate out maybe once or twice monthly. That was it. Instead, I learned to cook simple, cheap, nutritious food at scale. Rice, beans, chicken thighs, eggs, oats, frozen vegetables, canned tomatoes, lentils. These are not glamorous foods, but they're nutritious, filling, and extremely cheap. I meal prepped every Sunday. 2 to 3 hours of cooking produced most of my meals for the week. My actual food spending, approximately $280 to $320 monthly. Not the $400 I budgeted. Less. The remaining $100 went to my emergency fund. Decision 3. Transportation in a high-cost city. Most high-cost cities have public transportation. I sold my car. This decision felt enormous. In American culture, a car is independence. Not having a car feels like a step backward. But the math on car ownership is brutal. Car payment, $300. Insurance, $120. Gas, $80. Maintenance average, $60. Total, $560 monthly for the privilege of car ownership. Public transit pass in my city, $120 monthly. Difference, $440 monthly. Over 12 months, $5,280. Over 5 years invested at 7%, $37,000. $37,000. For the convenience of a car versus public transit. I bought a used bicycle for $200. For trips too far for the bike, I used transit. For rare occasions needing a car, I've used a car share service. My total transportation cost, approximately $150 monthly. The budget that actually worked. Let me show you the actual budget I ran for 14 months. Income, $2,000. Housing, $1,100. Food, $300. Transportation, $150. Phone, $40. I switched to a budget carrier. Same coverage, half the price. Utilities, $80. My share of the electricity and internet. Healthcare, $60. I was on a catastrophic coverage plan. Not ideal, but what I could afford. Miscellaneous, $70. Everything else, toiletries, occasional clothing, random expenses. Total expenses, $1,800. Savings, $200 monthly. $200 monthly doesn't sound like much, but it was $2,400 annually. That was my emergency fund. That was my security. That was the number that started building. And over time, as I stabilized and took on additional income through side work, that savings rate increased. What I discovered about fixed versus variable expenses. Here's the most important insight from those 14 months. There are two types of expenses, fixed and variable. Fixed expenses, rent, phone, utilities, insurance. These don't change month to month. You commit to them and they're locked in. Variable expenses, food, transportation, entertainment. These fluctuate based on choices. The key insight: fixed expenses are where your financial life is determined. Variable expenses are where you optimize. If your fixed expenses consume 90% of your income, you're trapped. No amount of variable expense cutting saves you. If your fixed expenses consume 60% of your income, you have room to maneuver. Variable expenses give you flexibility. Most people in high-cost cities have their fixed expenses too high. They're paying for housing, car, phone, and subscriptions that consume 80 to 90% of income. Then they try to save from the remaining 10%. It doesn't work. The solution is reducing fixed expenses first. Housing and transportation are the two biggest levers. If you can reduce those, everything else becomes manageable. The psychological reality of living on less. I want to be honest about what this actually felt like. Month 1 and 2. Genuinely hard. I was accustomed to a different life. Eating out, having my own space, driving when I wanted. Giving those up felt like loss. Month 3 through 6. Adjustment. I started to find the routine comfortable. Meal prep became enjoyable. Cycling became exercise I didn't have to pay for separately. The simplicity started to feel okay. Month 7 through 12. Revelation. Something shifted in my relationship with money. I stopped feeling deprived. I started feeling free. Not because I had more, because I needed less. The expenses I'd cut were not providing the happiness I'd assumed they were. The restaurant meals were convenient, but not life-enriching. The car was comfortable, but mostly a status signal. The private apartment was spacious, but mostly empty. The things that actually made me happy: friendships, meaningful work, physical health, learning, cost very little. This is the insight that personal finance books describe: but that you can only truly understand by living it. Your financial stress is not primarily caused by not having enough money. It's primarily caused by having expenses that exceed your income regardless of what that income is. The person earning $200,000 and spending $210,000 is more financially stressed than the person earning $2,000 and spending $1,800. The amount matters, but the gap matters more. What I would do differently. In the interest of honesty, here's what I got wrong. I didn't invest the $200 monthly savings. I kept it in a savings account earning essentially nothing. If I'd invested it in a simple index fund, over 14 months at 7% return, I would have had approximately $2,900 instead of $2,800. Small difference, but the habit of investing rather than just saving would have been worth establishing. I also delayed the car sale by 2 months. Pride kept me holding onto it. Those 2 months cost me approximately $1,100 in ownership costs I could have avoided. And I didn't negotiate my phone bill immediately. I waited for months before switching carriers. That cost me roughly $200. Small mistakes, but they show that even in extreme constraint, there are optimization opportunities I missed. What this taught me about money. The 14 months taught me things no book could. First, your lifestyle is more flexible than you think. What feels non-negotiable is often just habit. Second, fixed expenses determine everything. Optimize housing and transportation before anything else. Third, cooking is the most underrated financial skill. Learning to cook cheap, nutritious food saves thousands annually. Fourth, the gap between income and expenses is what matters, not the absolute numbers. Fifth, simplicity reduces financial stress more than income increases do. The simpler your life, the less you need to maintain it. Sixth, roommates are not failure, they're financial intelligence. Seventh, cars are the most expensive convenience most Americans pay for. In cities with transit, they're often unnecessary. $2,000 a month in a high-cost city. It worked, not comfortably, not without sacrifice, but it worked. The budget held for 14 months. I built a small emergency fund. I survived. And when my income eventually recovered, I didn't immediately inflate my lifestyle. I kept the roommate for 6 more months and saved the difference. I kept using public transit for another year. I kept cooking most of my meals. Because the lesson wasn't about surviving on $2,000. The lesson was about understanding the difference between what you need and what you've decided you need. That difference, clearly understood, is where financial freedom lives. Not in earning more, not in some investment strategy, in the gap between what you have and what you actually require to live a good life. That gap, cultivated deliberately, the foundation of everything.